So who out there loves controversy? Not me, really. I'm pretty easygoing, laid back. Like, I don't like getting involved in crap. But one of my hottest of hot takes that I have is the fact that I am pretty staunchly anti-downloading content, specifically games, movies, music. And this came to a head recently on a video that I did about a year ago talking about the Terra Onion interface for the PC Engine, which allows you to connect it to the back of your system and then dump your existing HuCard content to an SD card for your own personal backups. Fans of our channel know that I am not a fan of piracy. I am not a fan of downloading ROMs, but the Super HD System 3 Pro for the PC Engine core graphics does something really unique. Taking a look at the menu, look at this. Enable HuCard Dumper. What does that mean? That means you can actually back up your own PC Engine games to a micro SD card. Let me show you. Here you can see on the menu, you have an option to dump your ROM, dumping right now, backing it up to our SD card on the unit itself. Excellent way, excellent device. Absolutely love it. Stay tuned for our full-blown review. I have always followed that falls under fair use and is protected under copyright law. Well, some people have taken issues with that, saying that I'm a hypocrite, that there's no difference between downloading content and making a backup. Making a backup is just as illegal. Why do I care? So on and so on and so forth. So before we get too deep into this, one of the things I want to say here is you do you. I've used this phrase many times. I don't care. As long as you're playing games, have fun. This is my reasoning why I do or don't do different things. And the way that I have always looked at things, if I physically own a copy of it, so let me reach over here to my stack that I have. So I physically just grabbed a copy of Tiny Toon Adventures. I am legally allowed to use a ROM dumper, dump the ROM, and then load it onto something like an EverDrive to play on an NES. That's no problem. My philosophy and feeling has always been, if I don't own this, I do not have any rights to download a copy off of the internet for personal use or for distribution. Also, I can dump this ROM to use personal use in my game room, upstairs in my living room. I'm perfectly fine. I cannot take that ROM dump and give it to you or give it to a friend or anything like that, or post it onto any of the ROM sites for them to download. Where I first got into any sort of preservation along these lines, and this is what it basically falls under part of the copyright law in the USA, and I believe it's called Section 117, that basically says that you are allowed to make a physical backup of your games. And they don't say games specifically, they say software, but for most arguments, people will, for the most part, agree this is software. So that is what I have kind of followed over the years. And, you know, I love the fact that there are tools out there, the Homebrew channel for the Nintendo Wii, for example. You can go ahead and you can download your physical discs. So people I know are worried about scratching or archival or disc rot. You know, this way you can go ahead and play your games. You still have your physical copy, but you're not putting wear and tear on them, if that makes sense. I have no issue with that. What I have issue with is people who go ahead, simply download content from any of the ROM sites that are out there, and they don't physically have the games, and they're just essentially stealing content. I don't, for me, I can't morally justify that. But I'm also following parts of the law here as well. Why do I care about this? Well, in the end, you know, big companies have lots of money, so what does it matter if I'm taking something from them for free? The publishers have already made their money when they sold. They're not getting any more money. It has nothing to do with that. You know, the whole argument, well, the publisher already got their money. Yeah, absolutely. You know what? There are tons of mom and pop resale stores out there that, this is how they feed their families. They buy stuff from people who are looking to sell, and they turn around and sell it. Is there a profit in there? Absolutely. If you have a problem with capitalism and things along those lines, that's a different argument. That's a different argument altogether. But people do get hurt if you download and pirate games that are no longer available first party. They are available through third parties. They're so expensive. Yep. You're such a gatekeeper. No, because like I said, I don't care what you do. This is what I do. These are the moral guidelines I follow. But like I mentioned, this is actually based in my interpretation of trademark and copyright law. And I'm not a lawyer. But thanks to our good friend E.C. Myers Vids, make sure you check him out. You're going to hear his name again in just a second. We actually have a lawyer that we're going to talk to. All right, and now we are joined by our good friend David, who is actually, thank you, David, for joining us. Our good friend E.C. Myers actually is the one that got us in contact with you. And if you haven't checked out Eugene's channel, I'll have it linked for you right up here. He does amazing stuff. Good friend of the channel, amazing author too. David, thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thrilled to be here.
So this is, David is a lawyer by trade, expertise kind of leaning towards the copyright and trademark side of things. So I figured since I have no legal background in any of this, I just have my personal experiences from my work background, I figured it'd be good to have someone who was a heck of a lot smarter when it comes to this stuff than I am. So this is, don't take this as like, I saw a lawyer on YouTube that said this. If you ever have any questions, please seek your own legal counsel and advice. So I think I've lawyered ourselves up pretty good there to start, David. Anything else before we get in this?
Yeah, no, this is informational. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not Gary's lawyer. This is just sort of a background on what the law is, not advice or a guide to anything.
So to kind of set this up, as I mentioned before I had you on, my take on downloading ROMs, ISOs, games, content from the internet has basically been, one of those things. You don't own the copyright, and copyright does matter. So for me, I don't do it from a moral standpoint. It is technically against the law in most instances, but my take has always been you kind of do you. The explanation I've used in the past, and Dave and I were actually talking a little bit before we started recording here, has been movie content that may be out of print or no longer offered. Just because the company that runs or owns the copyright doesn't want to sell you something doesn't mean you have a legal right to it. Would that be a pretty fair and accurate way? Just again, and I'm just looking at letter of the law kind of thing versus like, I just want it. Is that a pretty fair statement?
Yeah, that's right. There's something called abandoned works in copyright, which maybe the law should address, but even if someone's not currently offering something on the market, you can't rent it, you can't buy it, you can't stream it somewhere, that doesn't mean it's just free for you to take. There's no use requirement for copyright. In fact, even if a company's gone out of business, someone has likely bought their assets, and there is someone out there who owns that and has the right to say whether or not you can copy it, distribute it, broadcast it, because they own the copyright to it.
Now that does, if a company goes bankrupt, and one of them I'm thinking is Hudson, the creators of the TurboGrafx 16. Konami owns all of those assets now at this point. So just because Hudson no longer exists in its former form, Konami still has rights to all of that. So you can't just say, well, that company's not in business anymore, so I can just use it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Konami has the right, if they own the copyrights, which I believe you can say they do, to bring an infringement action against someone who copies, performs, distributes something they own the copyright in. And that would include not only distributing it to other people, but downloading it yourself.
Where does the law, or how does the law apply? Example, I own a copy of Super Mario Brothers 3. I own many copies of Super Mario Brothers 3, as probably many people in this audience also do as well. I have it physically on the cartridge. I am allowed, per the letter of the law, to make a backup from my understanding. if I don't have the tools and resources to dump that ROM physically from the cartridge, am I legally allowed to download that ROM from a website?
No, no. The backup, the copying and backup exception for software in the statute is for a very specific purpose, and that's because there's two reasons. Software, when you actually use it, copying is inherent to the use of software. You have it on some non-volatile, like a cartridge or a hard drive, and parts of it have to be copied into RAM to be run. And that's part of the normal operation of software. So there's a carve out for that. And then additionally, there's a carve out for backing something up. If you own something, you're allowed to make a backup copy. And this again is because if you have a hard drive, you can back up your whole hard drive. It has 15 copyrighted programs on it. Oh, now you've got 2 copies of that. That's not prohibited. However, you're not allowed to make a backup and then sell the original. And you're also not allowed to make a backup and just give it to somebody. And it has to be your backup or a backup that that someone did for you as a professional or at your behest, like a computer professional. You can't just say, oh, well, this guy in Russia who dumped it 6 years ago, he made a backup for me of my copy. That's not how that works. And similarly, you can't say, well, I've backed up my entire Nintendo collection. I'm just going to put those up on the public web for anyone to download, or even on the public web or private web or private server. You can't just do that. That's not what that backup provision allows.
Okay. So, and where this kind of conversation, this concept for this episode actually came about was I had done a video over a year ago. There's a company that sells a device for, it's actually for the PC Engine, the Japanese version of the TurboGrafx 16. We mentioned that a few minutes ago, where you can basically put your game into the system and it'll dump your game to an SD card for archival and backup. Now, as long as I'm not selling my physical copy, I'm maintaining that, and I'm only using that backup for personal use. And the other position where this comes into mind, a lot of people are worried about CD-based games like the Sega Saturn, the original PlayStation, that suffer from disc rot, so that if the disc stops reading, they still have a version of that game to play. Is that permissible under the way? And again, I just want to make this clear too, everything that's being referenced here is based on US copyright law. Completely understand copyright laws are different around the world. I'm just talking about stuff here in the US. Is that an acceptable use of that?
That's a very important point, what you mentioned about it being US only. I'm a US lawyer. It differs in Japan. There are some international treaties, but there are differences around the world, especially around fair use in both directions. So I'm not going to speak directly to any particular device or process, but based on the statute, yes, if you own a copy that you've acquired either directly or because there's something called the right of first sale, where you can, as you know, resell actual items, and you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to make a backup for, as the statute says, your actual backup purposes. You can't just say, I'm going to make a copy and then give it to someone else. I'm going to make a copy and then sell my original. You have to, it specifically says, in fact, if you sell the original, you have to destroy the backup. So, yeah, from my understanding of that portion of the law and how you describe that process, that sounds to me to be basically permissible. But I want to make it very clear that, again, the statute does not permit any kind of distribution or sharing of those copies, however they're characterized.
Correct. And a lot of this, as far as the enforcement, and this as a lawyer, depends on what judge you get in front of as well and how they interpret the law too. So there is always that. And like the first time that I ever did any of this, quite honestly, was when the Nintendo Wii was around. My oldest daughter was maybe 4 or 5, and there is a tool on that allows you to back up your collection to a hard drive. I just didn't want her scratching my discs. I never got rid of my discs. I basically used it as a video jukebox. So that's kind of how I look at that. Are you up for going through a couple of comments that we've had on some videos recently and kind of addressing some of those topics?
Sure. I'm happy to do that.
So
Uh,
this first one here comes from I was never here, LOL. That's literally the name, and we're going to pop this question up on screen. How are you stealing something from a company if it isn't hurting their bottom line, which is money?
so this is a question I get a lot in a lot of contexts. And we're talking about now, well, how are they actually being hurt? So in a lot of the law, you have the question of, did you do something wrong and were there any damages? And in a lot of parts of the law, if you can't show damages, there's no actual claim there. They can't do anything. That's not true in copyright. So we can talk all day about, well, how are they actually being harmed? That's not the real question. The real question is what happens to you if you do it. And in copyright, there's something called statutory damages, which means they don't have to show they've been harmed. They don't have to have been harmed. If they can show that you infringed their copyright, they can get a certain amount of money, and I think the minimum just changed, but a pretty significant amount at the high end if they can show that you willfully, knowingly infringe their copyright. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars sometimes, and much, much more if you're someone who's distributing these to other people. We're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes,
and imprisonment if it's serious enough.
Yeah, there's a criminal statute too. There's criminal copyright infringement, although that is very much on the large distribution end.
This next one here comes from Ghost Cat 8244, and this is one that I get a lot. And for me, it falls under a saying from one of my favorite talk show hosts, Mark Belling. People are likelier to believe things are true which they wish would be true. So it's rationalization is the second strongest human drive. So his comment here is, I mean, the prices for retro systems and games are getting to be way too pricey. Downloading ROMs from a really, really old game isn't a big deal. The developers aren't losing money from a 20-year-old game. I would love to rebuy my PS2 games again, but some games are starting to be $200. My argument for that is, sorry for your luck. If something's $200 and that's what the market is willing to bear on it, that's not justification for just downloading something. The analogy I've always made with that is, if I want to go get a Corvette, but my budget says you're getting a Cruise, I can't go to the dealership and just drive off with a Corvette because I really, really want one and it's too expensive for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's not like the retro video games are a necessity of life.
Right.
And even beyond that, it's possible that they might republish it. Certainly, we're seeing a ton of releases to all the major platforms, to their stores, of either remakes or updates or collections of these very much 40, 30, 20-year-old games. Just this year, I think I bought for the Switch. I bought the GBA Castlevania games, and I played them again. And if I had said, 6 months previous, oh, I'll just get a ROM of these games that I really do want to play again, well, then that actually would have cost Konami some money. So it's absolutely not true that it's not going to cost them money. It is costing them opportunity. And even aside from that, again, whatever you feel like, whatever you think they may or may not be damaging, it is copyright infringement. And there is a chance that they will bring an action against you and claim statutory damages.
How does it, if you have a piece of software that let's again, a random NES game A, you have the equipment to download the ROM from your physical cartridge to back it up to play on an EverDrive on an NES, for example. Under the way the law is written, are you only allowed to continue to use that software on the original device it was released and intended for, i.e., an NES game on an NES versus an NES ROM that you've made a backup of on a PC on an Android device, something like that. Are there provisions for that, or is it pretty much it's intended to be used on this piece of hardware and that's only what you should be using it on?
That's actually a very good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Okay. And I don't either. That's why I asked.
Well, it's interesting because emulation is a separate issue. Emulation itself can often, depending on how the emulator was developed, can be a copyright or patent issue. But let's leave that to the side. I really don't think I can answer that. That's an interesting question. I'd have to look into that. My instinct is to say that, assuming generally that the emulator itself isn't infringing any of the rights of the original hardware maker, which that's a sort of deeper question that I'm not getting into right now. And then assuming that there's no other contractual rights in how you acquire that software or how you acquire the original hardware, I still don't know. That's actually a very good question.
I'm glad that I got you stumped. And our final question I'm going to leave you with here, and this one's a bit long, so please bear with me. The problem is, and this is from Charles Tannehill 7537. Problem is, they sold me the content and then proceeded to require me to be online to play it just so I can see their ads. I know being online is not a requirement for any game other than server-based games, so on and so forth. Let's see. Do I think it's okay for them to do that, but it is not okay for a person who paid for a legit license to play a pirated copy because they don't want to be barraged by ads and restricted by being online? So this kind of directly speaks towards like ROM hacks and things along those lines. My feeling, and better or worse, whatever, I don't do EverDrives. I don't do emulation. It's one of those, I think ROM hacks are an extremely gray area, especially if you are using, like, there's some great Super Mario World ROM hacks I would actually love to play, but for me personally, I can't support that because it's Nintendo's IP. Regardless of how you're remixing it, it's still not something that from a legal standpoint is defensible. And kind of to follow up on that, the other question too is something that was purchased via digital download that storefront or whatever has gone dark and is no longer offered. That still doesn't give you permission to download through other third-party sources due to licensing agreements that copyright holder had with that distribution store, to go ahead and download it in other ways. If it's not available, it's not available. And that's why I like physical versus digital.
So I'm going to answer the easy part of that question first.
Okay.
Which is the question he asked and you got to in the end, which is, I don't like the experience of playing the game the way it was sold to me, so I'm going to pirate it, which is what it boils down to. And
right.
I mean, I'm sorry you don't like the experience of playing that game, but I don't see how that justifies infringing their copyright. You're making a fundamentally moral argument that you don't like how it's being sold to you, and unfortunately, the answer is, well, don't buy it then. And if you're not going to buy it, don't play it. And if you do buy it, if you want to do an ad blocker or something, that may be available to you, but you can't just pirate it because you don't want to connect to their verification server or whatever they have set up. Now, the other question with ROM hacks and things like randomizers is actually one of the more interesting questions here, because those are what are called derivative works. And there's sort of two things there. One is there is an element of just copying. And the other is, well, they've created something that's new and different and derivative. And there's a very significant fair use question there of, well, what if it's actually some kind of second level software that sits in between the legally acquired software and the output that does some kind of processing or loads in a separate, a non-authorized file. That kind of alteration, something you own, that's a sort of interesting question that's is very case by case, and I don't want to sort of give any bright lines on regarding, well, a randomizer is this versus a ROM hack is that versus a custom-made level with it for something that doesn't have a level editor is a third thing. Certainly, distributing those is almost certainly copyright infringement,
even if it's given away free.
Yeah, giving something away for free is copyright infringement. It's not a right to sell; it's a right to distribute, a right to transmit and broadcast and copy. No one would say it's not copyright infringement to go out and stamp 100 DVD copies of a movie and distribute them on the sidewalk.
Well, David, I want to thank you for your time. You are obviously much smarter than I am. If people want to find any more out about that, are there any resources that you can recommend them to look for? And I'm not doing one of these wave the finger at you and whatnot. It's just this is kind of why the guidelines I follow. If you want to do it, like, I don't care. In the end, it's risk versus reward. If you really want to do it, fine. But if anyone wants to do any more research on their own, just to get a better understanding, where can they go?
So the Copyright Office and the Library of Congress actually have excellent resources for the layman on what's permissible, what the statutes permit, what the various carve-outs are, a sort of explainer on fair use, an explainer on Section 117, which is the backup and copying for software limitation on copyrights. So copyright.gov, I would start there. They have a bunch of excellent resources for the layman that you can start with.
And I said that was the last question. I've lied slightly. You can hold me in contempt for that one. The legit final question here. If someone who has the copyright decides to go, like, for example, and I'm not picking on anyone, but decides to go to the National Video Game Museum, they hold the copyright and say, here's everything. I am presenting it to you. Please use it as you see fit for archival purposes. And if you want to distribute it, we don't care. At that point, it essentially becomes fair use. What is that fair to say?
Well, it's more than fair use. So there's sort of two possibilities there. You can just release something in the public domain. You can surrender your copyright. You say, I surrender this public domain. Anyone and everyone can do whatever they want with it. And a copyright owner can do that at any time for any reason or no reason. They can also engage in what's called a very permissive license. They can say, we license this to everybody. We authorized everybody to make derivative works of this, distribute it freely. That's what an open source license is, or a copyleft license is. Plenty of things, a lot of software, games too, are distributed under that sort of scheme or license. And some of those have, it's non-commercial, it's attribution, it's only in this area, it's only this portion. Going back to 30 years ago now, that was the model used, for instance, for Doom. Doom and Wolfenstein, the way they were marketed was it said you can freely distribute and copy the engine and the first 3 levels, but you have to pay if you want the rest of the game.
Okay.
And that was called shareware back in the day.
Sure.
And
I think that's how I played it to begin with.
That's how I played it. And, there are programs still distributed that way today. So yeah, a copyright owner can do almost anything. They can slice up their rights virtually however they want. So yeah, they could give it to the National Video Game Museum. They could give the National Video Game Museum the absolute right to distribute it for a donation or for free. Or they could say, we give it to you to archive and keep in your archive, but please don't distribute it.
Sure.
And by the way, there is a carve out for fair use in the copyright law. And that is for educational, to a certain extent archival purposes. So the museum is going to be in a different situation than you or I, as far as copying something or downloading something or finding something online. They don't have total carte blanche, but they are in a different situation because they are an archival institution with educational purposes. And similarly, if you were teaching a college class or a high school class or any kind of educational program on a particular video game, you might be able to do certain things that you couldn't otherwise. But I want to make clear that just saying the magic words fair use or the magic word educational doesn't make it so. It actually has to be a real thing. You can't just pretend and say the magic words.
Yeah, it's like I can't just stream Michael Jackson music on my YouTube channel with no transformative work to it and say fair use. No, that's illegal distribution.
Right. And the transformation as the sole test was sort of struck down by the Supreme Court just a few months ago, where it's a little more complicated than that. You should really consult with a lawyer. And if you've already consulted with a lawyer, if it wasn't in the last 3 months, you should probably do so again before relying on fair use to use anyone else's work. The law has narrowed a little bit from where it was previously perceived to be. And I don't want anyone to think that you can just say, oh, it's fair use and get away with something. You should consult with a lawyer. You should really explain to them what you're actually intending to do. And then based on their advice, consider what you're going to do.
Well, and the kind of thank you, first of all, David, for joining us here today. One of the things to always keep in mind, too, the law is always changing. And when it comes to digital online, the law always kind of follows versus leads what's actually happening in real life. We saw this probably most recently, like with drone laws and whatnot, how, drones were out for several years before the FAA is like, maybe we should look into this drone thing. So it's always one of those that do your due diligence and, stay on top of things. And, you will have a lot to have to go through. So, David, thank you again for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great one.
Again, thanks to David for coming on, appearing, and spending some time with us. We got deep in the weeds there, but I wanted to do that just to show that, to be blunt and a bit crass, I'm not just being a dick. I am a dick. I can be one. I don't care how you play your games. I really don't. This is an explanation as far as the guidelines I personally follow for me. I understand that Panic Restaurant is stupidly expensive. Do I want to play it? Not really. Am I going to download it? Not really. But I know that there are people out there that are like, I'm going to download it and try it, and then if I like it, I'm going to go and buy it. You know what? I don't care. In the end, I really don't care what you do. This is what I do. And that's all that I wanted to talk about here. And again, thanks to David for going ahead and talking with us here and kind of sharing, a little bit more legal expertise. I do take pride in the fact that I stumped him on the can I take a piece of software and play it on something other than what it was originally intended for? That's an interesting question. And proof, too, that not even a trained lawyer understands how everything can go together and work with this. The law is frequently changing, and like we mentioned, this is based strictly on U.S. law. Different countries have different laws and different regulations. I don't know what those are, and I won't claim that I do. But it's one of those things that, I've had, as I mentioned, and I'll have it linked down below. I'll put a link up here too, to the video that I did on the Terra Onion, the Super HD for the PC Engine, and people calling me a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite. This is the interpretation of the law. This is the way the law is written. That's what I follow. And there are accommodations underneath there for what that device does and the way that I utilize it. Now, if I were to take that and dump, Darkwing Duck for the TurboGrafx 16, which is my Retro Life's favorite game for the TurboGrafx 16, make sure you head over to his channel and let him know how much you know that he loves Darkwing Duck on the TurboGrafx 16. It's his favorite. If I want to take that hue card, dump that data, and just play the hue card, or not play the hue card, but play the ROM file off of the Terra Onion, I'm within my right. The same thing falls underneath like the Homebrew channel on the Wii if I'm going to back up my Wii games or GameCube games. The SD card units that are for the Saturn and for the GameCube and for the Dreamcast and for the PlayStation 1. The video that I did on the PlayStation 1 Classic Edition, how to back up your discs and then load them onto that to be able to play, that's covered under what we did here and kind of why and how I did not only, did that, but why I made those videos. And like I say, I'm not judging anyone. I'm no perfect person myself, so I have no right to judge anyone. But again, these are simply the ways and the rules and the guidelines I follow for myself. So again, you do you. In the end, as long as you're playing games and having fun, that's all I care about. So if you do want to check out that Terra Onion video that I did, I will have it linked for you right up here. And again, just go out, have fun, and play some games.